Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Gloria and thank you so much for clicking on today's video. Today I wanted to go through the issue of root rot, which is super important because it happens to the best of us and it tends to happen even a little bit more with beginner plant parents. So I know a lot of you guys kind of like these tip and care videos. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started. But before we do so, make sure you subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on any of my new videos. And yeah, let's jump right into it. First off, I'd like to kind of show you the setup of my plants because I tried to set up most of my plants now such that root rot is not a huge issue. So with my soil plants, I do try to keep most of them in clear pots. So they're essentially orchid pots, but that way you can see when the soil is kind of drying out. You don't have to just kind of hold the plant and feel the weight of it because obviously dry soil is a lot lighter. I still tend to stick my finger into the soil just to check, but yeah, this is how I set up a lot of my plants. So they are in these clear orchid pots where you can see the soil, you can see the roots, you can see the health of the roots. These are really healthy roots, so I'm very happy about it. And this way you can tell if roots are rotting. So how I describe root rot is essentially the roots are dying, and they're dying mainly because of two reasons. So first, the soil that's staying around the roots is too wet and they're staying wet for too long. And number two is lack of oxygen flow. So that way the two kind of work together to kill the roots. So it's not really just a matter of overwatering your plants and keeping your soil too wet for too long. You also have to restrict oxygen and airflow. So what really helps with that is using these orchid pots. So there are ventilation slits on the side here, as you can see. There's also a drainage hole at the bottom and drainage slits. So it allows any of the extra water that you put into the soil to flow out, and it doesn't keep the roots wet for as long. It also obviously matters what type of soil mix you use. So if you use just regular old potting mix, that tends to retain a lot of water. There is a much higher risk for root rot if you tend to just use the potting mix, but if you add different amendments, so if you add some perlite, some pumice, some bark, whatever, those additions will really help reduce the risk of root rot because it makes the soil and the medium a lot more fluffy and airy and just more well draining, which is what you want. You do want to make sure you don't overdo this and put too much of these perlite, pumice, bark, because if it doesn't retain enough moisture, the roots won't get enough water. And you do have to find a good mix for your environment because everyone has a different environment. It really depends on the temperature and the humidity of where you're growing your plants. This helps reduce root rot by a lot if you have a good well-draining medium, and also there are ventilation slits or ventilation holes on the side of your pots. Last but not least, having a drainage hole at the bottom so that excess water can flow out. So that's what I do with my soil plants. And obviously not all of my plants in soil do have the ventilation slits. Something like this is just a normal plastic, hard plastic nursery pot, and at the bottom it does have some drainage holes here. So this one I do kind of water less heavily, so I kind of water until the water drains out and then I put it back into its place, but I make sure there's no excess water that's collecting in the saucer and just letting it sit there because you don't want too much water in this medium. And I usually just dump it out and then I put the saucer back on so that it looks like this. I try to use mostly clear pots, but sometimes you just don't have that option or you run out. So another way is to actually change your medium. So if you find you tend to rot your plants more easily in soil, maybe you could change to inorganic medium such as leca. So leca is a really good medium. It's essentially clay balls. It's very wicking, so it takes the water from the water reservoir at the bottom and it wicks the water up to the roots, and that's how it hydrates the plant. And this is how my Cebu Blue is doing. So there's lots of roots at the bottom, as you can see, and essentially the leca is the perfect medium to help prevent root rot So obviously I'm talking about plants that are already acclimated and adjusted to the leca. So I'm not talking about when you're first transitioning your plants from a different medium to leca, but if your plants are already growing in leca and they're healthy, this is a really good way to help prevent root rot because there's so much like air pockets and there's a lot of good ventilation airflow between the roots so that you don't really get root rot. And that's why I like to grow a lot of my plants in leca. I don't have to test my soil or my medium with my finger to see if it's still damp, if it's still wet, if it's dry. I just don't have to have any guesswork. So it's a lot easier to make sure your plants are healthy when you're growing it in leca. Obviously, there is the initial period where you're transitioning your plants from whatever medium, soil, moss, water to leca, and there is that like shock factor where the roots could rot. But once it's like adjusted to this medium, it does really, really well. And I have a lot of my plants in leca, so I don't really deal with rot anymore. I had a lot of my Hoyas actually rot in soil, but since being in leca, they've been a lot happier and it's just a lot easier for me to care for them. So this is another plant that's currently in leca. I'm using the orchid pot with the slits along with leca to kind of do like a double whammy in terms of preventing root rot. And this is my melanochrysum that's currently in leca. It's never had rot before while it was growing in moss before, but you know, this way as it gets bigger there's a lot less chance for it because melanochrysums tend to rot really easily. I find a lot of aerites do because they like well draining soil, they like to not have their feet constantly wet, which is what root rot could be caused by. Those are mainly the tips that I have for preventing root rot. I mean, it happens to the best of us. I've literally had a lot of plants get rot before, whether they're in soil, whether they're in moss. Less likely for leca, but I would say I've still had some rot in leca due to the transition period, but not actually growing in leca. So I hope that makes sense and you found it somewhat helpful. Comment down below what your experience was with root rot in the past. I'd love to know. My worst one was probably my jewel orchid, which was my macodes sanderiana. That one is actually no longer with me because it's just dead. It rotted in the soil medium that it was in, and by the time I got to it, I tried to propagate it and stick it back in some moss to grow some roots, but it just couldn't take it, so therefore it died. But yeah, most of my plants, if they do get root rot, it's not like a complete deal breaker and the plant could potentially survive, but that one just didn't. Make sure you give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed, and thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.